Welcome back to our channel, Hope. You all are fine, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin with another day off aviation miracle. Tonight, a plane nearly crashed into darkness, and the only thing standing between disaster and hundreds of lives was a lone runway painter. The airport at midnight was a different world. The day's bustle, the loudspeakers, the chatter of passengers. The constant roar of engines, all had faded into a hushed, almost reverent silence. In the distant control tower, dim lights flickered, barely illuminating the faces of controllers hunched over monitors. Outside, the vast runways stretched into darkness, partially lit by faint blinking edge lights, the rest swallowed by fog that rolled in thick waves from the horizon. Among the shadows and dim glow moved Clara Vega, the airport's night runway painter. She was unassuming, dressed in reflective overalls, with a paint cart trailing behind her, brushes and spray cans organized with precision. Tonight, she had a simple task: repaint the long, white markings on runway 4, correcting wear from weeks of flights. It was a quiet, solitary job she had done countless times. Yet the air tonight held a subtle tension she couldn't place. The fog thickened with every step she took, curling around the blinking runway lights. It hid the edges of the tarmac and swallowed the distant hangars whole. Clara switched on her portable LED lamp attached to her helmet, its narrow beam cutting a narrow path through the gray haze. The sound of her wheels against the asphalt was the only noise. Rhythmic, repetitive, almost hypnotic. Suddenly, a low vibration ran through the ground beneath her boots. Not from her cart, not from the wind. It came from the far end of the runway, subtle at first, like a warning pulse, then stronger, resonating through the concrete like the heartbeat of something immense. Clara paused, bending slightly to feel the surface. It was irregular, almost like the air itself was vibrating. She scanned the horizon. The fog obscured everything, but far in the distance, a faint, pulsating light moved too fast for a maintenance vehicle, yet too low for a plane. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the instinct of someone who knew that every inch of runway mattered. She turned her attention to her work. The lines needed precision. The airport wasn't forgiving of mistakes, but something was off. The freshly painted stripes she had laid down seemed misaligned, almost imperceptibly shifted from the sensor guidance lines that the planes followed. Clara crouched to measure, using a small laser guide she carried for accuracy. The readings didn't make sense. The markings were perfect, but the sensors above the runway, feeding data to the control tower, were showing discrepancies. Tiny, invisible, deadly errors. A plane coming in to land, relying on these sensors, could easily follow the wrong path. The thought made her stomach tighten. Far above, the lights of an incoming flight appeared, slicing through the fog like a slow-moving comet. Its landing gear was deployed, glinting in the sporadic runway edge lights. The plane was too high, too fast, descending along the wrong path. Clara's eyes widened. The sensor readings, the vibration, the misaligned markings, it all clicked. Something was gravely wrong. The plane, if it followed these signals, would approach a section of the runway that was under construction. The concrete there was uneven, equipment scattered. Clara's mind raced. She had no radio, no immediate way to contact the tower from this part of the runway. Every second mattered. The plane's engines droned, growing louder, carrying through the thick fog. The vibration beneath her feet returned stronger this time, synchronized with the plane's descent. Her cart scraped against the asphalt as she moved faster, scanning for any temporary markers she could use to guide the aircraft. The fog swallowed the plane almost entirely, leaving only the faint glow of its landing lights visible. Clara's heart pounded. The runway markings, though meticulously painted, couldn't guide the plane if the sensors were feeding it false coordinates. The emergency lights at the edge flickered irregularly, adding to the disorienting maze the pilots faced. Every step Clara took was measured, precise, yet hurried. As if the runway itself were a living entity she had to navigate carefully. She reached the section of the runway that was most dangerous. Construction barriers, loose machinery, and recently poured concrete barely hardened. A single wrong alignment, and a plane following the sensors would strike the equipment at full speed. Clara's eyes darted around. She pulled reflective tape from her vest, unrolling it along the correct landing path. Each piece of tape was positioned to catch the faint light of the plane's approach, creating a visual guide to complement the faulty sensors. Time stretched. The hum of the engines grew into a roar, carrying through the fog like a warning. Clara moved swiftly, adjusting the placement of a temporary beacon. She had rigged a blinking light secured atop a small tripod. Its intermittent flashes cut through the haze, a lone guide in the sea of gray. She stepped back, chest heaving, sweat dampening her hair under the helmet. The plane's landing lights suddenly illuminated the fog ahead, throwing ghostly shadows across the runway. A gust of wind swept the fog along the tarmac, distorting the light patterns. Clara held her ground, eyes fixed on the distant glow of the approaching aircraft. Her reflective paint lines, the blinking beacon, the visual cues she improvised, all depended on the pilot noticing them in time. One misstep, 1 second's delay, and catastrophe would strike. The plane's shadow loomed closer, immense and terrifying. The vibration under her feet intensified with each passing moment, syncing with the roar of the engines. Clara's vision narrowed, every muscle coiled with tension. Her cart scraped again as she repositioned a marker, ensuring the plane's wheels would touch the reinforced section of the runway. The fog swirled in erratic patterns, hiding and revealing the lights, turning the runway into a phantom maze. Then, a sudden jolt of awareness hit her. She could see the pilot's final approach now, perfectly aligned with her makeshift guidance. The blinking beacon and reflective markers formed a trail through the fog, a visual lifeline connecting the chaos. Below it, the critical aircraft, descending above. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. Fog, lights, vibration, engines, all in perfect, precarious balance. Clara's chest rose and fell, frozen in a combination of fear and determination. She adjusted the last piece of reflective tape, her hands shaking slightly. Every nerve screaming urgency. The plane's shadow expanded across the construction area, but her improvised path held. The engines roared past, massive wheels touching asphalt perfectly aligned with her guidance. The vibration under her feet softened, slightly as the aircraft began its smooth deceleration, following the trail she had painstakingly created. Clara exhaled, though the fog still hung thick, still swallowing the world beyond her small radius of light. The plane, alive with hundreds of passengers, unaware of the danger they had narrowly avoided, glided to a safe stop along the runway, engines throttled down. The hum faded, leaving only the whisper of the fog moving across the tarmac. She stayed crouched for a long moment, alone, silent, heartbeat echoing in her ears. The night returned to stillness. The airport lights blinked steadily once again, the fog curling lazily, indifferent to the crisis it had nearly concealed. Somewhere far above, a plane safely reached the gate, passengers stepping onto the terminal unaware of how close disaster had been. And on the runway, hidden beneath the weight of night and fog, a single runway painter slowly stood, paint cart abandoned at her side, knowing she had done the impossible. Tonight, a life-saving hero remained unseen, but her courage had lit a path through darkness, marking the beginning of a story that no one would forget once told. The night deepened, and the fog thickened until the world shrank into a small circle of light around. Clara Vega, the runway, once stretching endlessly in both directions, now felt like a narrow corridor suspended in emptiness. She stood still for a moment, letting her breathing settle, her heartbeat slowly easing after the near disaster she had diverted moments ago. But the silence around her didn't feel calm. It felt watchful, heavy. The glow of the plane that had landed safely faded into the fog behind her, swallowed whole as if it had never passed through. Clara leaned against her paint cart, trying to process what had just happened. The malfunctioning sensors, the misaligned guidance cues, the odd tremors under the ground, none of it made sense. The airport systems were designed to be flawless, redundant, too many layers of protection to allow a plane to stray, so dangerously close to construction zones. Yet tonight, something had slipped, something subtle, something quiet, something that should have been impossible. She stood and looked down the runway again. The fog swirled unnaturally, shifting in patterns that seemed deliberate. Her reflective markers glowed faintly in the mist, forming the improvised guide she had created in desperation. The blinking beacon still pulsed steadily, an artificial heartbeat in the dark. Its light carved a small, trembling space of clarity in the surrounding void. Clara approached it, adjusting its position again out of habit. But the vibration she felt earlier returned, deeper this time, longer, almost resonating through her bones. She froze, trying to determine its source. It did not come from another plane, not from ground equipment. It was too rhythmic, too alive. She stepped forward carefully, placing her foot on a patch of asphalt near the construction zone. The ground felt warmer there, as if the fog had somehow insulated heat into the concrete. She crouched, touching the surface. The faint tremor rose again, humming underneath her fingertips like a buried current. Something was wrong beneath the runway. She stood again, turning toward the construction barriers. Their silhouettes seemed larger than before, rising like giant, sleeping creatures under the fog. Beyond them lay the uneven patches of half-finished concrete, the trenches running parallel to the runway, the machinery sitting silent and cold. Clara walked toward them slowly, each footstep soft, cautious, as if the fog itself were sensitive to movement. Her helmet light swept across the ground, revealing details the fog had hidden earlier. A set of skid marks, fresh, deep, leading diagonally across the runway toward the construction area. But they weren't from her cart. They were too wide, too sharp, and they appeared in a place where no vehicle should have been. Not tonight. Not with the runway closed for maintenance. She followed the marks, her breath fogging inside her visor. The tracks led toward a trench at the side of the runway, then vanished. Clara leaned over the edge of the trench and saw something unsettling. Loose dirt displaced in a pattern that didn't match any worker's shovel or machine. It looked dragged. Long grooves carved into the soil, as if something heavy, yet shapeless, had been pulled through. Her chest tightened. This wasn't an ordinary malfunction. Something had disturbed the ground beneath the sensors, throwing the guidance feeds into chaos. Something that had moved unseen under the fog. Clara stood back, suddenly aware of the silence pressing on her. The fog shifted again, swirling behind her as if reacting to her discovery. She turned sharply, scanning the darkness. The runway edge lights flickered, in a pattern she had never seen before, one light blinking twice. Another once, then a pause, almost like a sequence, almost like a signal. Her instincts told her to move. Move quickly. But her duty held her still. If the sensors were compromised, if something was warping their signals, then another incoming flight could be in danger. She knew the schedule. A cargo plane was expected soon, and then a full passenger flight shortly after. Clara hurried back toward her cart, pushing it closer to the center of the runway where the fog thinned slightly. She reached for a handheld scanning device she kept for, checking line reflectivity and power feed signals. Tonight, she needed it for something far more serious. She pointed the scanner toward the row of guidance sensors lining the runway. The device beeped irregularly, its digital readout fluctuating wildly. Some sensors were emitting normal levels. Others flickered with strange patterns. And one, the critical one near the construction area, was completely dark. Not broken. Not powered off. Dark, as if something were blocking it. She moved toward that sensor, her feet crunching lightly against the runway grit. The fog thickened again around the device, clinging to its metal frame like a living veil. The moment she stepped near it, the ground trembled once more. This time, the vibration was unmistakably stronger, longer. She crouched beside the sensor, wiping away a thin layer of moisture. The lens was cracked, not shattered, but cracked from the inside out. A fracture spidered across the glass, radiating from a single impact point that didn't look mechanical. More organic. Clara stared at it, her heart beginning to race. The sensor had been damaged from beneath. Something had struck it upward, not from any tool, but from something pushing out of the ground. She backed away slowly. Her breath grew shallow. The fog distorted shapes around her, making the runway seem like a shifting labyrinth. She turned toward the distant control tower, its lights barely visible. She had to reach it. She had to report this before the next plane approached. But as she took her first step, the fog in front of her parted briefly. A faint glow pulsed beneath the runway surface. Soft, blue, almost ethereal, like veins of light running through the concrete. The glow faded just as quickly as it appeared, leaving only darkness behind. Clara froze. The vibration under her feet stopped. The fog fell still. The runway lights steadied. A perfect, Unnatural calm settled over the night. Clara realized the truth, with a chill racing through her spine. Whatever had caused the malfunction, whatever had moved beneath the runway, was still there, and it was waiting. The stillness that settled over the runway was unnatural, thick enough to press against Clara Vega's skin. It wasn't the usual gentle hush of midnight fog. It was a silence that seemed alive, watching, waiting, listening. Clara kept her feet planted firmly on the asphalt, afraid even a single step might awaken whatever lingered beneath the surface. The faint blue glow she had seen pulsing under the concrete had vanished, yet the image of it burned in her mind like an afterimage. The ground looked ordinary now, the cracks hidden. The fog returned to its slow drifting coils, but the silence betrayed the truth. Something had changed. Something beneath her was aware of her presence. Clara forced her breathing to slow. The air felt oddly warm for a winter night, carrying a faint metallic scent she hadn't noticed earlier. The headlamp on her helmet flickered once, then steadied, casting elongated shadows across the construction area. Each shadow stretched unnaturally long, wobbling slightly as if the fog itself were alive. She turned cautiously toward the trench where she had seen the dragged grooves in the soil. The fog curled over the edge like smoke over a pot of boiling water. Clara approached the trench again, this time even more carefully, keeping her steps light, avoiding the smallest sound. The grooves in the dirt beneath still looked fresh, deep, wide enough that she couldn't imagine any tool or machine dragging through them. Without noise, her light traveled along the trench walls, revealing patterns in the soil, curved lines, uneven impressions, and something else she hadn't noticed before. Faint blue specks embedded in the dirt, luminescent and pulsing so faintly she almost missed them. They looked like tiny shards of light. Not plastic, not paint, not debris. She crouched and touched one. It felt cold, much colder than the surrounding ground, almost icy. As she brushed her finger against it, the ground beneath her vibrated softly, like a living organism reacting to touch. Clara pulled her hand away quickly, her pulse spiking again. She stood and backed away from the trench. Something deep below stirred. A ripple ran through the fog-covered air as if a breath had been released. The vibration grew slightly stronger, then faded again. Clara tightened her grip on her scanner, pointing it at the ground. The device beeped, its readings spiking erratically. Signals were bleeding into one another. Overlapping, guidance data, electrical currents, ground temperature anomalies, everything scrambled. The malfunction wasn't random. Something was interfering with the sensors deliberately, selectively, almost intelligently. Clara's headlamp flickered again. The fog thickened, swirling faster now, moving in circles around her feet. She stepped back toward the center of the runway, trying to regain a vantage point, but the fog followed. She felt as if she were being surrounded. She glanced toward the control tower. The faint outline of its windows glowed in the distance, blurred by fog, but still visible, a comforting reminder of normalcy. She wanted to run toward it, but her legs did not move. Instinct warned her that sudden movement might provoke whatever lay beneath the runway. She shifted slowly. Her boots scraped lightly across the ground. The fog responded, curling upward in a slow spiral. She raised her headlamp, scanning the runway markings she had painted earlier. The lines glowed faintly under her light, but something about them seemed off now. The fog distorted their straight shape, bending them slightly, twisting them into optical illusions that made the runway look warped. Another vibration pulsed beneath her feet, stronger, longer. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She reminded herself she was trained for emergencies, malfunctions, ground hazards, even runaway vehicles, but nothing in her training covered this. The runway felt alive, as if something beneath it was moving, shifting, trying to understand the world above. She opened her eyes again and spotted movement near the damaged sensor she had inspected earlier. The fog thickened around it, swirling with purpose, not drifting randomly, but gathering, pulling together as if drawn toward the broken device. Clara's heartbeat quickened. Something pulsed beneath the sensor housing. She stepped closer, her breath trembling. The cracked lens emitted a faint glow now, blue, the same shade she had seen under the runway. The fracture lines lit up like lightning frozen in glass. The glow intensified. The ground beneath the sensor heaved upward slightly, just a few millimeters, but enough that Clara saw the asphalt shift, crack, then settle again. She stumbled back. The vibration rose again, not rhythmic this time, but uneven, sporadic, like the heartbeat of a creature struggling to emerge. The fog around the sensor shot upward in a column before dispersing. Clara stared, unable to look away. Her scanner beeped frantically. Temperature spike. Electrical interference spike. Magnetic disruption. All rising. All pointing to the same source. Clara's instincts screamed at her, "Move! Now!" She began to step backward, slowly, keeping her eyes trained on the sensor. The cracks beneath it widened. A thin blue line of light seeped upward through the fissure, glowing brighter. Then it stopped. The glow disappeared. The ground fell silent again. Clara paused mid-step, frozen. The fog stopped swirling. The runway lights steadied. The vibration ceased. Everything returned to stillness so suddenly it felt staged. A trap? She scanned the runway again. No movement. No glow. No tremor. Just silence. A deep, unnatural silence that felt heavier than noise. Clara forced herself to breathe. She reached for her emergency flare, a bright red beacon she rarely used. If the control tower couldn't see her through the fog, the flare might cut through. She pulled the cap off, ready to ignite it. The fog behind her shifted. Clara froze. Slowly, she turned her head. A faint, circular ripple moved across the fog like a disturbance traveling through water. It passed along the runway surface, light and subtle, and then converged near her reflective tape markers. The very path she had created earlier to guide the incoming plane. The tape began to glow, blue, the same unnatural blue. One strip at a time. Left side, right side. A perfect synchronized pattern. Each section lit up in sequence, following the path she had made. Not randomly, not naturally, as if something beneath the runway was tracing the path she had laid out. Learning it, memorizing it. The glowing path led all the way back to Clara's feet. Her pulse hammered. The fog thickened again. The ground vibrated once more. Something was following her guidance. Something under the runway. And now, it had found her. The runway lights flickered again, this time with a sharp pulse that spread like a wave across the asphalt. It was the kind of flash that didn't just signal danger, it screamed it. The painter felt the vibration beneath. Her palms as she knelt beside the open trench. The exposed junction box was now glowing far hotter than it had minutes ago, its metal frame trembling as if something inside was struggling to hold itself together. Above her, a distant rumble swelled through the fog. The same approaching jet whose descent she had been watching helplessly. Its landing lights cut two piercing lines into the night, slicing through mist that swirled like ghosts fleeing its path. She could sense its size even before it broke the cloud cover. It wasn't just another aircraft. This one was heavy, slow, and dangerously close. If the runway lights failed, if the guidance system collapsed, the aircraft would be landing blind, and the trench right beside her would become a grave for hundreds. The wind shifted, pulling a cold gust across the runway as if nature itself sensed the coming disaster. The fog rolled lower, hugging the runway surface, until the world felt no bigger than a few meters around her. The massive jet's hum became a thunderous vibration in her chest. The painter steadied her breathing. She had no radio, no warning system. No one knew she was here. No one knew the runway's guidance line was seconds from a full electrical burnout. She inspected the wiring again, trembling as she saw the extent of the damage. Moisture had seeped deep into the cables, corroding the inner copper. A single spark could ignite the underground circuit into a full ignition. The ground beneath her shook harder as the aircraft broke through the last layer of cloud. Its landing gear unfolded like dark, skeletal limbs reaching for the earth. The painter knew she had one chance. She reached into her tool pouch, fingertips closing around the emergency isolation clamp she had. Never needed until tonight. Every part of her training said this clamp should only be used with a second electrician present, but she had no second electrician. No crew, no supervisor. She was alone on the runway with seconds, left on the clock and a plane descending whether the runway was safe or not. Her hands moved with instinct she didn't know she had. She wiped the moisture from the sparking cables, her gloves absorbing more water than they should. the air filled with the sharp scent of burning insulation. The junction box glowed hotter, orange now, like a piece of metal pulled from the heart of a furnace. Above, the jet's roar deepened into a low thunder. The landing lights were almost overhead. She could feel the air pressure shift, the turbulence rippling through, the fog as the aircraft's enormous weight approached. The runway pathway she was still kneeling beside. She clamped the first cable, no change. She clamped the second one, still no stabilization. The lights along the runway flickered violently, one by one like a line of candles dying in the wind. The painter felt panic clawing at her ribs, but she didn't let it take over. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remember every step she had practiced in a quiet workshop far from any real danger. She grabbed the final cable, the one with a faint pulse of heat inside it. She could feel it through her glove. It was the core cable, the heart of the runway's guidance system. If she isolated it wrong, the entire system would go dark. If she didn't isolate it at all, the overheating would force the junction to explode right as the plane touched down. There was no safe option anymore. Her hand tightened. A blinding spark erupted as she clamped the final cable. The shockwave knocked her backward onto the fog-covered asphalt, the world around her bursting into white light for a brief, terrifying moment. The junction box hissed violently, then fell silent. She scrambled to her knees, heart pounding, senses ringing. And then she saw it. The runway lights steadied. Not bright, not perfect, but steady. A thin, unwavering line of light guiding the aircraft towards safety. The plane emerged from the fog with monstrous grace, wheels inches above the asphalt. The painter stumbled back, barely escaping the turbulence that tore across the ground as the jet landed with a deep, echoing shudder. Tires screeched, fog rippled, the aircraft's weight pressing into the runway like a giant exhaling a final breath. For a long moment, the world paused. The engines roared as the plane slowed, finally coming to a safe roll down the runway. Emergency vehicles raced toward it, but none of them saw the lone painter standing beside the trench, covered in dirt, paint, and ash. They didn't know the runway lights had nearly died. They didn't know the trench had been moments from exploding. They didn't know that the reason the aircraft rolled safely instead of crashing into darkness was because she had refused to leave her post. As the fog thinned, she looked at the glowing guidance. Lights, weak but alive, stretching. Across the runway like a lifeline returned from the edge of death. Relief washed over her, heavy and overwhelming. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. The simple knowledge that hundreds of lives had touched down safely because she stayed, that was enough. But fate wasn't done with her. When the pilots finally stepped out of the aircraft and spotted the exposed trench, the tools, the freshly clamped cables, and the faint scorch marks, they understood. One by one, crew members looked toward her standing quietly at the edge of the runway, her reflective jacket glistening in the mist. In that silent moment, lit only by the surviving runway lights, they knew the truth. The plane hadn't landed safely. She had saved it, and on that darkest night, the runway painter, someone most people never noticed, became the unseen guardian who saved hundreds of strangers with nothing but courage, instinct, and a pair of trembling hands.